We are live. How exciting. I guess I'll just see at the end if anyone, because I'm not seeing it on the YouTube, but okay, we'll just go see what happens. Oops, my video is playing. Okay. All right. I am super excited. This is my first live interview. I guess you could call it a podcast. My name is Rebecca Abraxas, Brilliant Possibilities, and I'm here with Meghan Lockhart, who lives up in Canada. She's an intuitive mentor, yoga teacher, and womb priestess. And today we are talking about the power of the feminine to manifest what we truly desire. So this is a topic that Meghan and I are really curious about. Meghan works with this with her clients on a regular basis. We both have a priestess background and yoga background, and I'm super excited to just dive in to see what Meghan has to say about this topic. So, Meghan, hello.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Would you tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about your background with the work that you do?
Yes, absolutely. So the way that I really show up in this world is I support women to empower themselves. And I do that through a variety of mediums. And so the main way I do that is through one-on-one work and group programs. And I really like to work with different tools like temple ceremonial spaces as platforms of healing and transformation. I really like to work with different yogic and tantric tools and technologies, all with the idea of supporting women to heal whatever stories, wounding patternings that are rooted ancestrally in childhood and in past lives, to support them to more fully anchor into their bodies and into their innate wisdom and power.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I think that's really required on the planet right now. So thank you for all you do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That is awesome. Okay, I have a few questions here for you. Let's see. Oh, so this is something that's very curious to me. The difference between masculine and feminine energy. That has always been an interesting question to me because it seems like a lot of people relate it to gender. So could you speak on that? Like how does masculine and feminine energy show up in the physical world with our energetics? And also, like, is it matched in with gender, or is it like a totally different thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. In my experience of being trained as a priestess and also walking the path of initiation in yoga and studying the Vedas and the Tantras and things like that, what my current understanding of that, because it keeps evolving a little bit, and I've realized that sometimes the way of perceiving these polarities is not always as clear cut as it may seem. The way that I'm perceiving them now is that it's not related to gender in any way, but that they're energies that exist inside of every single being. And the way that I like to think about it the most is that the feminine consciousness is more related to the moon and the energy of the moon, and the masculine consciousness is more related to the sun. And so those are really good things in our external world that can teach us about those energies, because we can see them outside of ourselves. They're just mirrors to what's already happening inside of us. We all have that solar energy inside of us, that masculine energy. We all have that feminine energy inside of us. So when I think of the masculine energy through the sun, it's constant, it's direct, it's powerful, it's vibrant, it's linear. And when I think of the moon, it's more receptive. It's the reflection of the sun, and it goes through different phases. And so in the mystery school that I'm an initiate in, there's 13 different phases of the moon cycle. And so we see that just looking at those two things that happen in the physical world, how those are mirrors into that energy. And in my understanding is that there's, light qualities and shadow qualities of both consciousness. That's not even a word. But there's the light qualities of the masculine, and there's the shadow qualities of the masculine. There's the light qualities of the feminine, and there's the shadow qualities of the feminine. And you see them mirrored in all people. You see them mirrored in empires, in levels of consciousness, and how we've progressed as a human species. You've seen certain levels of consciousness. For instance, the masculine consciousness has been more of the ruling order for the last several centuries, for the last thousands of years. And in my opinion, and from my research, it seems that there's been more of the shadow masculine that has been operating. And there have been times historically, from my research and my remembrance, that it was more of a feminine consciousness that was at play. And I've seen in my remembrance the feminine conscious being in the shadow and the light both. And so, yeah, I guess we'll see where you want to go from there.
Yeah, I love how you said that, like in your research and your remembrance. So on my YouTube channel, like I always say in my videos, we're here to remember our greatness together. And I believe in what you just said. It is a remembrance. We are like starting to pull in memories. Because our memories get swiped as we incarnate, right? And we have to kind of start all over again. So it's that remembrance is so key. I just love how you worded that. That was beautiful. I love how you explained too how the masculine and feminine energies have a pro and con, and that I think it's really important that people realize that it's not gender based, because when they say, "Oh, this is a man," embracing his feminine, it just doesn't land in this culture. Like, so I feel like it was, it's like flow or linear. I just wish we had different names for them, because gender topics are just so fueled with judgment, right? So it's just both these energies, the moon and the sun energy, like you're saying, I kind of like that better than the masculine and feminine, because it's so wrapped up in judgment. So but anyway, that was a beautiful description of that. So I'm curious, because our topic is the power of the feminine, right? To manifest what we really desire. And I feel like anything that we're looking to manifest in our lives is truly to become our best selves, to be happy and have that peace within, and to really remember what we are, which is that source energy. So I feel like whatever we're manifesting, it's to get to that space. So I'm curious, your perspective on masculine manifesting and feminine manifesting. Do we do them both at the same time? Or are we coming to a time in history where the feminine, it is really time to kind of go into that moon feminine way of manifesting? And is one more aligned with ascension? Is one more aligned with dimensions?
Those are all really good questions. And for the kind of first line of the questions, I feel like it's both. It's a combination of both, because what I've seen in the public eye, especially in the coaching world and the divine feminine world, we see a lot of talk of the divine feminine being the way to manifest. And then I always see kind of in the polar opposite conversation is people often talk about the shadow masculine as not what is being right. So I feel like it's really a combination of the light masculine qualities and the feminine qualities coming together, and that it's both. So I feel like we have been out of balance. There's been a huge imbalance in terms of manifestation has looked very masculine, and it has looked a lot in the shadow masculine. It's looked a lot more like pushing and striving. And bulldozing and sacrificing and martyr, kind of those levels of consciousness, which to me are all in the shadow masculine levels of being. So for me, when I think about the ideal way of co-creation, I think about the light qualities of the feminine harmonizing and meeting the light qualities of the masculine together, so that it's not one or the other, but that it's both coming together and merging. And I think because we've seen such a we've had such an experience of the way of manifesting looking like the shadow masculine qualities, that in order to balance and to meet the masculine where it is, I think there is a call for there to be a more feminine, lunar based way of creating. But I would say if that was the only way, and it was only ever the only way, that it would get out of balance. So I think there always needs to be that harmonizing, because that's the yoga, that's the union of bringing the masculine and the feminine together. So to me, it's like the feminine does need to rise in order to meet the masculine where it is, and to be able to balance those two things together in that co-creative process. So I think that right now there is a need for more co-creation from divine feminine and lunar processes that look more harmonized with nature, that look more in sync with the cycles of the moon. And we've had so much creation that comes from a place of exploitation and constantly growing that doesn't come from sustainability. So much of that lunar wisdom, so much of that divine feminine wisdom, when we follow the cycle of the moon, is you create. But then there's also that restoration, there's that rest period, there's that time to restore. And so finally, with COVID, we've had the opportunity to see what that looks like on a planetary level, where instead of just constantly striving, the entire globe was united in this pause. And in this pause, there were so many news articles and stories coming out about how the waterways through different cities were starting to be clear and clean, and just the way that it impacted Earth. And so I feel like that's just the best example we have where we are in history of being able to see that lunar wisdom of that sacred pause, of that gestational period to be in that regenerative period. And so to me, there always needs to be that period of regeneration, which just hasn't been happening. And so that's where I feel like the lunar wisdom and the divine feminine consciousness in creating is so important, because it's from that gestational period. It's from that dark moon space. It's from that letting go. It's from that surrender. It's from that spaciousness that we actually receive.
Yeah, beautiful. That's really an important thing, because like we're talking about that pause. A lot of times we're in this do mode, right? Like I have to do to manifest, and it's like what I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this in your reality too, is that when I just go feed me, right? When I get into the flow and I feel like I'm in the downstream, or I go for a hike because my body just needs that, my body and being needs that break. All of a sudden I come back and, there's a few more subscribers. There's someone that wants a session. And I'm like, oh, instead of like, what should I do next? Like all of a sudden, if we give it breath room, we give what we've gestated and created, and then we give it some room. And like you're saying, it's almost like that balance of that masculine, like do, and then pull back and allow and gestate, and then you come back and forth. Or if we stay in this linear masculine, and then we don't give it the flow. I think of it like this, because from a yogic perspective, the intertwining of the Ida and Pingali,
Mm-hmm.
the Sushumna, and the Sushumna being that central channel, and we need both weaving like this equally, like you're talking about. and the Ida Pengali, I think it is the masculine and feminine energies, right? And they're weaving that you can't just have one doing this and then, oh, I gotta get to, it's like this constant, beautiful weave. And so yeah, I really love how you're putting all this with the symbology. Very cool. So from a practical level, if we're living in, um, just we're living in our worlds, we're living in our businesses. Uh, ultimately, whatever we're creating, we're going toward that inner peace and, personal evolution and growth. But what does that look like in a practical level? I'm a very practical person. How do we take these symbols and these philosophies and broader perspectives, and how do we just really embody them? Which it sounds like you do with your clients, like that embodiment, and not only embodiment in our own bodies, but embodiment in our lives. Like how do people play with it in family life? How do we play with it? And I know for me, being in the feminine and gestating and trusting that things are working out sometimes gets me like, okay, trust, but my mortgage is due kind of thing. And it's just like, okay, how do we work?
Mm. It is a sacred
Work with
dance.
it practically?
Yeah, it is a sacred dance of weaving the mystical into the mundane. And I feel like we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so I feel like it's being able to kind of like have one foot in one world and the other foot in the other world to, and that's really what a priestess does. Is a priestess, is open to divine and to transmission and to goddess, and is anchoring that in the third dimensional world. Because if we're only in the spiritual world, then we're aloof and we're not grounded here in the third dimension. And if we're only rooted in the third dimension on earth, then we're not connected to the spirit. So it's that weaving in of both. And so I feel like there's so many practical and tangible ways to weave in this divine feminine lunar consciousness into everyday life, to support business, to support relationships, to support really any aspect of your life, that it can all be applied. So that's a really big question. I feel like we could go on so many rabbit holes with it.
Like could you give 3 pointers to our viewers that could really, like, maybe 3 pointers that come to you, trusting that, the divine is speaking through you, and that, like, what would be 3 that we could just really tap into right now for our viewers?
Okay. Yeah. Since we're talking about manifestation, one thing that's coming through is the cyclical wisdom, and how that can come into your everyday life. And so say that you have a business project and you really want to start a podcast. We're here with the podcast. And so you could follow that manifestation. I really like to use the word co-creation. You can go through that co-creation manifestation process with the lunar cycles. So say you want to get this project out into the world, and first we're starting with we always start with the new moon. So the new moon is that time when there's just that slight little sliver of light in the sky. That's when you're really open and receptive, and you're downloading, you're receiving vision, you're receiving ideas, you're receiving that spark. You're just sitting, and you're not trying to be like, this is my will of what I want to get in, but I'm opening up to all of my guides. I'm opening up to goddess. I'm opening up to whatever energies I want to work with. And I'm receiving that download. I'm receiving that remembrance. And then you move through the cycle. So then as you go to with the waning moon, that's where you really start to clarify. That's where you're starting to get more action. You're starting to build more energy. Maybe you're starting to collaborate with people. Maybe you're starting to reach out with people. You're starting to really bring that vision into being. And then we go to the full moon, and that's kind of like the full pregnancy, the full expression in that cycle, right? Because we're never really complete. But for that cycle of the rendition, maybe the first draft of the podcast, you're coming to this place after 2 weeks of having maybe that first piece of clarity is now sort of at its peak, where you've received the vision, you've started taking action, and all of a sudden you're starting to really take more forward action in terms of in clarifying and amplifying and seeing that vision. And then when we go into the waxing phase, that's when you really start to let it go. And you start to be like, okay, I've had this piece of clarity. Now it's time to reflect. Now it's time to let that go and trust, because that's when some more of the shadows start to rise up, the doubts, can I do this? Are people really interested? Are people going to listen? That's when some of those, I like to call them little inner gremlins, start to come out. So that's when it's time to just, when the shadow makes itself known, to give it spaciousness, to reflect, to write those revisions, to write that recopy, to come back to it. And then when you get back to the dark moon, that's when it's time to just fully trust, to fully surrender, to fully let go. And then you can keep working with that cycle, even with the podcast.
Can I just get one moment of clarity here? So the shadow and the doubt, I love what you're saying here. It's really fun. It's a fun little system to work with in the physical reality. So when you're at the full moon, that's when when it starts decreasing in size again. That's waning, right?
That would be waning.
Okay. So the decreasing in size, is that when the shadows and the doubts come in a little bit?
Yeah, once you start waning. Okay. And especially in the last quarter of the cycle. So when you're kind of like full moon to the third quarter moon, you're still kind of like riding that high energy of the full moon, where it doesn't come up quite as much. There's still quite a lot of energy from the full moon, but once you get to the third quarter moon, and then you're starting to go to the fourth quarter, like the whole completion, is kind of like that last cycle of the moon, where it's like the light is waning and waning and waning until it's the dark moon. That's when you notice the shadow and the doubt and the most. And
I'm going to track that. That because, people talk about just being affected by the full moon. And, and I feel like, I think this is a great tool. And I also feel like, also let's use it as a tool rather than a phase lock, right? Like a part that we are always affected by, kind of thing, right? So it's like, yes to this tool, yes, that we can use it as a cyclical tool, but it's also like, you can also step out of its effects, right? So it's, I think it's, as most things in our lives, it's like, yes, and there's another reality too. So yes, and there's another, so it's like, but I really love, it'd be cool to track this, to see when some of the doubt comes in. For my own experience, I'm really asking for guidance right now on my next training and stuff. And it's going to be in the heart of winter in Vermont. And I'm kind of like, I really want to, like, is this really lighting up? And I'm asking for clarity. I'm asking for guidance. I'm asking for signs. And all of a sudden it went blank. And when you just said, oh, like, you may have more guidance at this time of the moon, I was like, oh, that's very interesting. So I'm going to use this system as a little tracker to see where we can really consciously work these energies of the moon phases. So that's really cool. So full moon to third quarter is when we're going to be kind of riding, maybe being a little in more do mode.
Yeah, I would say really the second quarter to the full moon into the third quarter is when if we're going to say there's a feminine consciousness to the moon cycle and a masculine consciousness, let's say that the masculine consciousness of the moon cycle is from the second quarter to the third quarter to, the first quarter to the second quarter to the third quarter. So basically that half full moon to the full moon to then the waning half moon. That would be the most masculine consciousness of the lunar cycle. And then if we were going to go to the third quarter to the fourth quarter, and then the fourth quarter to the first quarter. So you see how I'm kind of making an arc. It's like, that would be more of the feminine consciousness, because even within feminine consciousness, lunar consciousness is feminine. There's still masculine qualities within it. So it gets nuanced, so that would be the time where that would be the most optimal time for outward orientation. And like you were saying, it doesn't mean that, because to layer on top of that, you have your own cycle, and your own cycle doesn't always match up with the moon. And so sometimes, even though I was saying during that third quarter to fourth quarter is when more doubt would come up, it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. It could be experienced as trust and surrender. But when you're not in trust and surrender, that's when it's more experienced as doubt. But if you're experiencing trust and surrender, then that phase of the moon is juicy. It is like deep, and it's very sacred. It's just, there's more spaciousness. There's more of a pause. There's more of an inward orientation. And so how each person experiences that has so much more to do with what's going on internally. Like, these are just kind of the energetic expressions. And then you mix in that with your own cycle plus what's going on in your internal landscape. And that's how you experience those energies that are just naturally there.
I love that. I love how you just said that the shadow and doubt phases of a creation, if we can surrender, can actually be a trusting time. And so that's how we transmute shadow and doubt. So it's just like we work through them to find that surrender, but that's where that phase, it's almost like every phase almost has a polarity, but that's beautiful. Doubts turns into trust in the same phase. It's like, that's really cool. And it depends on what, broader perspectives we're working with, where we are in like our personal evolution with certain projects. And, because, how often at times can we feel expanded and really, at a high vibration with one area of our life, only to look at another area and we're like, So it's fun to look at, one areas where we feel like we're really growing and really having these areas that we are manifesting in ways that we really are like, and take that and put it into an area that might be a little harder to manifest in, and take where we're learning from ourselves, in those different areas. But really beautiful. Okay, so that was number one. Number two, for how do we bring this feminine manifesting into physical reality?
Yeah. The second thing that comes through is the co-creative part of it. And that when I think of manifestation from a masculine perspective, I kind of think of it as like, this is my goal, this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it no matter what, and there can be that very like laser like kind of focus. And which is beautiful, it's almost like sometimes you need that to take you through those challenging times. Like when the doubt arises, it's like you need that drive, you need that to take you there. And then what I really like to marry that with is the co-creative process, because when you have the inspired action, the co-creation is, to me, bringing in that divine feminine principle that you're not necessarily the creator of it, that you're in co-creation of bringing something into the world, and that it's not necessarily always going to happen how you want it to happen or how you think it needs to happen, and that necessarily the end result doesn't actually matter, that it's the journey, it's the process. And so I feel like when you kind of have that marriage of the two, of like, let's have that drive, let's have that determination, and then when you bring in that co-creative principle, it becomes less about defining worth and defining success based off of what you see happening in the physical world, but it becomes about trusting that what happens is what you actually need to happen for your soul. And that sometimes when you have a goal, that comes from egoic drive and egoic desire, that it's not actually always what you need. And when you're co-creating and you're coming from this principle, sometimes it's more of this is actually what you need. But sometimes when you surrender it and you co-create it, that you start to see it unfolding in a different way. And then it becomes this process that is more about the process, more about you growing and expanding as a soul, and less about the achievement or the success at the end point.
I love that. That is a perfect number 2 here. I love that you said that. And I you know, just to go on to whatever, follow up on that. I love this because I feel like how the feminine masculine can work together in their positivity, if that's the right word. You know, the masculine saying like, I'm making this goal, I'm making this choice, and then you surrender the outcome. But by making the choice, you change up the whole vibration of something, you switch the energy. So all of a sudden, the choice, so some people might get caught up in like a physical reality, being like, well, I made this choice, so now what? But it's like you make the choice, and by just making the choice, you shifted a whole timeline, shifted a whole possible future for yourself just by the choice, even if you did nothing else. So then you make the choice, you surrender, get your boat down and down flow again, and say, okay, now what's the next step? In which you said brilliantly is like, and the next step might not be leading you to that exact outcome you had in your head. So it like never shows up the way you think it is. And that's the beauty of manifesting with the feminine energy, is that you allow that. A feature of feminine energy, right, is allowance. So you allow the masculine to say yes, making this choice. Then you allow the feminine to back, just to hold the flow of where that goes, wherever that takes us. But it's really important to know that it's not a failure. It's not a mistake at all. Like to say this and then have something else totally thing happen, because that yes and that commitment totally opened up a whole like funnel to another reality that you could not have accessed unless you said this, right? I think that's what you're saying. Yeah. So that's
yeah,
beautiful.
exactly. And sometimes when you have that intention and it doesn't happen, and we're really caught up in it in terms of our worth, then it's like all of a sudden, what does this mean about myself? And when we kind of like take the broader picture in terms of this co-creative process, and we trust in the co-creative process, there's that trust is the foundation of this process really working and being able to work in this process, then sometimes your manifestation looks like nothing happening. And sometimes it's heartbreaking and it's challenging and it's initiating
a lot, sister.
And it's confronting. And then usually I always like to think there is a more divinely orchestrated plan, that my higher self is part of that orchestration. And I can't always see the whole plan. However, when I trust that even that perceived failure, let's say the manifestation not coming to fruition is a failure in this very third dimensional languaging, then I trust that I know that I'm supported. And what if this is creating more spaciousness to actually receive something even more aligned and even better?
Yes. Amen. All right. Yay. So we have cyclical wisdom, co-creation, and trust. And number 3, a wise sister.
So let's see what wants to come through in terms of bringing this into
feminine energy to manifest. What's a tool for that? Or something, a point.
Okay. I want to make it, let's just get really clear, kind of like the basics of all of this that we're talking about, and weaving it into a really simple practice would just be, if we think about the feminine as receiving the inspiration, and then the masculine as acting on that inspired inspiration. So, and letting that be a bit of a dance of open up, receive what it is that you're receiving, then take that action, do it. open up and receive, take that action and do it. And so that it becomes this dance in the process of co-creation and manifestation, that you're always working with both, and that in that dance of opening to receive and then acting on that inspiration, that becomes a really informative practice of your guiding light of how to help navigate that manifestation process.
I love this. And I just have to say, I love how you say process. I love it. Okay, so just to summarize what I hear you saying is receive and act. It's almost kind of like a little bit about number 2, but kind of just more concrete. But I love like receive and then act. How many times do we receive something, but we're waiting for something more, or like we're waiting for the whole picture, we're waiting for it to be perfect on some level before we take action. And I think it goes into that co-creation process of like receive, act, no matter what, because in that action, you get the next awareness to receive. And so it's really a powerful not to judge the receiving and what's being asked to act on. And it doesn't mean it has to be your next business. It doesn't have to define you. Make the act after you just got the receiving, and then that act opens up to the next awareness, to the next breadcrumb. So I think in the physical world, we get a little hung up on it being perfect, or us, presenting it the right way, and, the right words, and, with all of branding and all this stuff that tells us that if you don't have all your pieces together, don't act. And it's like imperfect action, right? There's that whole philosophy of creating in the physical world is just like, take imperfect action, because that imperfect action leads you to the next receiving. So I think that was a great number 3 to land on, because it's so powerful, this process of receiving and acting. And we inhibit ourselves, we hold ourselves back by our personal judgments and the collective judgment. We got to just throw that out the window. So beautiful, beautiful contributions. Thank you so much, Meghan. So cyclical wisdom, co-creation, trusting, and receive and acting. And all right, so just to wrap this up, is there anything that we left out or burning in your heart that you'd like to add to this or clarify, or
Yeah, I'm aware that there was one question you had that we did not get to. So I'm wondering if you want to weave that in, or if maybe it was answered and it just wasn't completely acknowledged. But you had asked how the divine feminine, is there a way of consciousness that is more supportive of ascension? And so I didn't know if you wanted to bring that a little bit more to the table.
Yeah, I think we can, because my practice is all about, embodying ascension and helping people on their journey with ascension symptoms, and really opening up the light body to receive, to do their ascension. And so is the feminine energy more kind of higher dimensional? But I think you did kind of answer that, like, that weaving that they both have a quality that works, I think, in ascension. But are we, as we head to 5th, 6th, 7th, higher dimensions, are we living more in the divine feminine energy, or the more flow and unity? And is masculine considered a unity energy too?
Yeah, the thing that comes to me is when we start to look at dimensional mapping from a tantric perspective, and when we get to the 5th dimension, that's the dimension of unity, and there's no longer dualism. So there's no longer the masculine and the feminine, it's unity. So in my experience of when we're talking about, so the 5th dimension and higher, like from a dimensional mapping perspective, technically the 13th dimension is related to Tantra, is related to goddess. And I think it's the 11th dimension is related to Shiva, which is the masculine. So when it gets complicated and nuanced, because 13 is, in my experience, is the highest. That's from where everything comes from, which is like the great mother goddess, energy. And from that, we have Shiva, who's holding that consciousness, who's perceived as a masculine consciousness. But then by the time we get into the fifth dimension, we no longer have those dualistic conceptions of how we perceive feminine and masculine from a third dimensional perspective. Those things are no longer together. I've not received an embodied experience of enlightenment, beyond this place. So I can't speak from embodied perspective. All I can speak of is from teachings that have been offered to me and that I've tried to conceptualize for myself. So I feel like it gets really nuanced because I just feel like they're both part of it. They're both part of it. And by the time you get to the fifth dimension, there's no longer any sort of distinguishment between the feminine and the masculine because it all just is, and it all is one. And so to me, when we're talking about ascension, that they're both super, super, super important in getting to that place of unity consciousness and that merging. And then to me, there's not one that is more that is better, that is more capable of helping to ascend because they've merged, they've come into communion and they've come into unity.
Beautiful explanation. And as the Ida and Pigali go up the central channel, it is the Shishumna. So I think in so much in ascension process and ascension talk, it's like, I see everything in concentric circles rather than up. Because everything is, and then it is like it's an expansion of each other. You know what I mean? So as and you can see that with the masculine and feminine too. We have that more in a concentric circle that's a little closer to the denser story reality, and then it just keeps going out and it keeps going out. And we get these broader perspectives on things, right? It's like what you're saying, and it all just becomes one. It all becomes just the central, like the Shishumna, and it's all inclusive. So it's not broken down. And it's like, there's a book called Conversations with God, and I think it's in the third one. He just talks about how it's kind of hard to fathom that like the universe is just always kind of multiplying itself or dividing. It's just like the entity that's speaking in that book, it's like it's halved from this and it's halved from this, and it's always on these concentric circles. It is, and it's more than that too. So it's like there's always in these bodies we tend to think things a little bit more linearly, that things have to kind of line up. And I think what you're saying is just like, I love how you're saying it. They come up to here and we get to unity consciousness, and it just like broadens out, and we no longer need the distinction. It just is. So yeah. I love how you speak about this. You sound so there's so much that you have, so much wisdom from the training and the experience and your personal practice. I can just hear it, and you have such a lovely way of communicating this to all of us. So thank you so much. If people are interested in learning more about you, learning about your path, and maybe even taking virtual coaching with you, where could you send them to?
Yeah, there's quite a few ways that people can get in connection with me. I spend the most time on Facebook, and I foster and steward a group called Wild Moon Sisters, which is sort of the hub for women to come to and really to start to get to know this work that I'm anchoring on the planet. So Wild Moon Sisters is a great place to start. And to explore deeper coaching with me, I always have one-on-one sessions on offer. And then I always have one-on-one longer mentorship on offer as well. So those are ways that people can connect with me and get started right away.
Awesome. Okay. And that's just Meghan Lockhart on the Facebook, or how do you?
Yeah, Meghan Lockhart, MEGHAN. And LOCKHART. And then if you type in Wild Moon Sisters, the Facebook group will pop up, and there will be links to my website, meghanlockhart.com, or wild-moon-temple.com. So,
Awesome.
mhm.
Beautiful. All right. And Meghan does have a YouTube channel too. Yeah, we were talking about that. So that's not one of her main platforms, but you can go to I don't know if you'll post this on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I will.
You can post it really anywhere. You can post it on your Facebook channel. And yeah, this is going to be a first of a series of just tuning in to people in the tribe here and learning from each other, remembering our greatness together. And we're all going to be coming from different places. So take what works and let go of the rest. And let's just, raise our vibration together and really be a contribution to the planet together. So thanks, whoever's watching this in the future. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll see you another time. Okay. We'll end there. I'm going to end the broadcast.